On November 24th, 1971, during the flight from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, a man who identified himself as Dan Cooper told a flight attendant he was armed with a bomb and demanded $200,000 in ransom, equivalent to approximately 1.5 million in today's money. He also requested 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, the hijacker instructed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. About 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, the hijacker opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the staircase, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington. Thus began one of the great unsolved mysteries in American history. Our episodes deal with serious and often distressing incidents. If at any time you feel like you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. This episode discusses hijacking. It may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. On November 24th, 1971, a man carrying a black briefcase approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. Using cash, the man bought a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to SeaTac, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. On his ticket, the man listed his name as Dan Cooper. Eyewitnesses described Cooper as a white male in his mid-40s with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes, carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag. Cooper boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727-100. Cooper took seat 18E in the last row and ordered a drink, a bourbon and 7-Up, from the flight attendant. With a crew of 6, consisting of Captain William A. Scott, First Officer William Bill J. Ratazak, Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson, and flight attendants Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffner, and 36 passengers on board, including the hijacker. Flight 305 left Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Schaffner, who was sitting in the jump seat at the rear of the plane, directly behind Cooper. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's phone number, Schaffner dropped the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. In neat, all-capital letters printed with a felt-tip pen, Cooper had written, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." Schaffner returned the note to Cooper, sat down as he requested, and quietly asked to see the bomb. He opened his briefcase, and she saw 2 rows of 4 red cylinders, which she assumed was dynamite. Attached to the cylinders were a wire and a large cylindrical battery, which appeared to resemble a bomb. Cooper closed the briefcase and told Schaffner his demands. She wrote a note with Cooper's demands, brought it to the captain, and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain Scott directed her to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events as they unfolded. He then contacted Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota and relayed the hijacker's demands. Cooper demanded $200,000 in non-denomination American currency in a knapsack by 5 p.m., 2 front parachutes and 2 back parachutes. By requesting 2 sets of parachutes, Cooper implied that he planned to take a hostage with him, thereby discouraging authorities from supplying non-functional equipment. With Schaffner in the cockpit, flight attendant Mucklow sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison between him and the flight crew in the cockpit. He then made additional demands. Upon landing in Seattle, the fuel trucks must meet the plane and all passengers must remain seated while she brought the money on board. He said he would release the passengers after he had the money. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. Captain Scott informed Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control of the situation, who contacted local police and the FBI. The passengers were told their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. Donald Nyrop, the president of Northwest Orient, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound to give Seattle police and the FBI sufficient time to assemble Cooper's ransom money and parachutes, and to mobilize emergency personnel. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Cooper demanded that Mucklow remain by his side at all times. She later said that he appeared familiar with the local terrain. While looking out the window, he remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew over it. He also correctly noted McCord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive from SeaTac Airport. She later described the hijacker's demeanour as appearing calm and not nervous, and that he was nice and not cruel or nasty. While the plane circled Seattle, Mucklow chatted with Cooper and asked why he picked Northwest Airlines to hijack. He laughed and replied, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge." Then explained that this flight simply suited his needs. He asked where she was from. She answered that she was originally from Pennsylvania, but was living in Minneapolis at the time. Cooper responded that Minnesota was very nice country. She asked where he was from, but he became upset and refused to answer. He asked if she smoked and offered her a cigarette. She replied that she had quit, but still accepted the cigarette. FBI records note Cooper briefly spoke to an unidentified passenger while the plane maintained its holding pattern over Seattle. In his interview with FBI agents, passenger George Labissonere said he visited the restroom directly behind Cooper on several occasions. After one visit, Labissonere said the path to his seat was blocked by a passenger wearing a cowboy hat, questioning Mucklow about the supposed mechanical issue delaying them. Labissonere said Cooper was initially amused by the interaction, then became irritated and told the man to return to his seat, but the cowboy ignored Cooper and continued to question her. Labissonere claimed he eventually persuaded the cowboy to return to his seat. Mucklow's version of the interaction differed from Labissonere's. She said a passenger approached her and asked for a sports magazine to read because he was bored. She and the passenger moved to an area directly behind Cooper, where the passenger and she looked for magazines. The passenger took a copy of the New Yorker and returned to his seat. When Mucklow returned to his seat with Cooper, he said, "If that is a Sky Marshal, I don't want any more of that." Despite his brief interaction with Cooper, the cowboy was not interviewed by the FBI and was never identified. The $200,000 ransom was received from Seattle First National Bank in a bag weighing approximately 19 pounds. The money, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most of which had serial numbers beginning with L, indicating issuance by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. Seattle police obtained the 2 front reserve parachutes from a local skydiving school and the 2 back main parachutes from a local stunt pilot. Around 5:24 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Captain Scott was informed the parachutes had been delivered to the airport and notified Cooper they would be landing soon. At 5:46 p.m, Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. With Cooper's permission, Scott parked the aircraft on a partially lit runway away from the main terminal. Cooper demanded that only one representative of the airline approach the plane with the parachutes and money, and the only entrance and exit would be through the aircraft's front door via the mobile air stairs. Northwest Orient's Seattle operations manager, Al Lee, was designated to be the courier. To avoid the possibility that Cooper might mistake Lee's airline uniform for that of a law enforcement officer, he changed into civilian clothes for the task. With the passengers remaining seated, a ground crew attached the mobile staircase. Per Cooper's directive, Mucklow exited the aircraft through the front door and retrieved the ransom money. When she returned, she carried the money bag past the seated passengers to Cooper in the last row. Cooper then agreed to release the passengers. As they debarked, Cooper inspected the money. In an attempt to break the tension, Mucklow jokingly asked Cooper if she could have some of the money. Cooper readily agreed and handed her a pack of bills, but she immediately returned the money and explained accepting gratuities was against company policy. She said Cooper had tried to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants earlier in the flight with money from his own pocket, but they had each declined, citing the policy. With the passengers safely off board, only Cooper and the 6 crew members remained. In accordance with Cooper's demands, Mucklow made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, which she brought to him in the rear of the plane. While Mucklow brought aboard the parachutes, Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse, stored in a compartment behind his seat. Cooper agreed and told her, "I won't bite you." Flight attendant Hancock then asked Cooper if the flight attendants could leave, to which Cooper replied, "Whatever you girls would like." So Hancock and Schaffner debarked. When Mucklow brought the final parachute to Cooper, she gave him printed instructions for using the parachutes, but Cooper said he didn't need them. A problem with the refueling process caused a delay, so a second truck and then a third were brought to the aircraft to complete the refueling. During the delay, Mucklow said Cooper complained the money was delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had directed, and he now had to improvise a new way to transport the money. Using a pocket knife, Cooper cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper aboard the aircraft, but Cooper denied the request. Cooper became impatient, saying this shouldn't take so long, and let's get this show on the road. He then gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives. A southeast course towards Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft. Approximately 100 knots, which is 185 kilometers per hour or 115 miles per hour, at a maximum 10,000 feet altitude. Cooper also specified the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps must be lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin must remain unpressurized. First Officer Ratazak informed Cooper that this configuration limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, so a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options and agreed on Reno Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Cooper further directed the aircraft take off with the rear exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest's Home Office objected that this was unsafe. Cooper countered, saying it can be done, do it, but did not argue the point and said he would lower the staircase once they were airborne. He demanded Mucklow remain aboard to assist the operation. Around 7:40 p.m, Flight 305 took off, with only Cooper, Mucklow, Captain Scott, First Officer Ratazak, and Flight Engineer Anderson aboard. 2 F-106 fighters from McCord Air Force Base and a Lockheed T-33 trainer diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission and followed the 727. All 3 jets maintained an S-flight pattern to stay below the slow-moving 727 and out of Cooper's view. After takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to lower the aft staircase. She told him and the crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested she come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to a seat. Cooper rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want her going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. She continued to express her fear to him and asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line for her. He said he would lower the stairs himself, instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the curtain partition between the coach and first class sections, and not return. Before she left, Mucklow begged Cooper, "Please, please take the bomb with you." Cooper responded he would either disarm it or take it with him. As she walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw Cooper standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. From takeoff to when Mucklow entered the cockpit, 4 to 5 minutes had elapsed. For the rest of the flight to Reno, Mucklow remained in the cockpit and was the last person to see the hijacker. At around 8 p.m, a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the aft staircase had been deployed. The pilot used the cabin intercom to ask Cooper if he needed assistance, but Cooper's last message was a one-word reply, "No." The crew's ears popped from the dropping cabin air pressure from the stairs being opened. At approximately 8:13 p.m, the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upwards, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. In his interview with the FBI, co-pilot Bill Ratazak said the sudden upward pitch occurred while the flight was near the suburbs north of Portland. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, unsure if Cooper was still aboard. Mucklow used the cabin intercom to inform Cooper they were approaching Reno, and he needed to raise the stairs so the plane could land safely. She repeated her requests as the pilots made the final approach to land, but neither Mucklow nor the flight crew received a reply from the hijacker. At 11:02 p.m, with the aft staircase still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft, but fearing the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, did not approach the plane. Captain Scott searched the cabin, confirmed Cooper was no longer aboard, and after a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. Local police and FBI agents immediately began questioning possible suspects. Acting on the possibility the hijacker may have used his real name, or the same alias in a previous crime, Portland police discovered and interviewed a Portland citizen named D.B. Cooper. The Portland Cooper had a minor police record, but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. In his rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long confused the man with the name used by the hijacker. United Press International wire service reporter Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media sources repeated the error, the hijacker's pseudonym famously became D.B. Cooper. FBI agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, and developed a series of composite sketches. Due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult. The jet's airspeed estimates vary. The environmental conditions along the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude, and only Cooper knew how long he remained in freefall before pulling his ripcord. The Air Force F-106 pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner, nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. Moreover, a black-clad individual jumping into the moonless night would be difficult to see, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover, and lack of ground lighting. The T-33 pilots did not make visual contact with the 727. During their forensic search of the aircraft, FBI agents found 4 major pieces of evidence, each with a direct physical link to Cooper. In addition to 66 latent fingerprints aboard the airliner, FBI agents recovered a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, a hair from Cooper's headrest, and 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray. 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and had 3 shrewd lines cut from the canopy. FBI agents found the black clip-on tie in seat 18E, where Cooper had been seated. Attached to the tie was a gold tie clip with a circular mother-of-pearl setting in the centre of the clip. The FBI determined the tie had been sold exclusively at JCPenney department stores, but had been discontinued in 1968. FBI agents found 2 hair samples in Cooper's seat, a single strand of limb hair on the seat, and a single strand of brown Caucasian head hair on the headrest. The limb hair was destroyed after the FBI crime lab determined the sample lacked enough unique microscopic characteristics to be useful. However, the FBI crime lab determined the head hair was suitable for future comparison and preserved the hair on a microscope slide. During their attempts to build Cooper's DNA profile in 2002, the FBI discovered the hair sample had been lost. In the armrest ashtray of seat 18E, FBI agents found 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts. These were sent to the FBI crime lab to search for fingerprints, but investigators were unable to find them and returned the butts to the Las Vegas field office. In 1998, the FBI sought to extract DNA from the cigarette butts, but discovered that they had been destroyed whilst in the custody of the Las Vegas field office. On December 6, 1971, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of an Air Force SR-71 Blackbird to retrace and photograph Flight 305's flight path and attempt to locate the items Cooper carried during his jump. The SR-71 made 5 flights to retrace Flight 305's route, but due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. In an experimental recreation, flying the same aircraft used in the hijacking in the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound or 91-kilogram sled out of the open air stair and were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section and brief change in cabin pressure described by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial estimates placed Cooper's landing zone within an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts focused on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the heavily wooded terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also carried out. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Cooper nor any of the equipment he presumably carried was found. Using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path known as Victor 23 in US aviation terminology from Seattle to Reno. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Shortly after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents, aided by some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. 2 local women stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County. It was later identified as the remains of Barbara Ann Derry, a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks before. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated to be between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines and the Air Force, the FBI determined Cooper probably jumped over the town of La Center, Washington. A month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, and other businesses that routinely conducted large cash transactions, and to law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money to a maximum of $25,000. In early 1972, U.S. Attorney General John N. Mitchell released the serial numbers to the general public. 2 men used counterfeit $20 bills printed with Cooper serial numbers to swindle $30,000 from a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming in exchange for an interview with a man they falsely claimed was the hijacker. In early 1973, with the ransom money still missing, the Oregon Journal republished the serial numbers and offered $1,000 to the first person to turn in a ransom bill to the newspaper or any FBI field office. In Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer made a similar offer with a $5,000 reward. The offers remained in effect until November 1974, and though several near matches were reported, no genuine bills were found. In 1975, Northwest Orient's insurer, Global Indemnity Co., complied with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airlines $180,000 claim on the ransom money. Later analysis indicated that the original landing zone estimate was inaccurate. Captain Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, later determined his flight path was farther east than initially thought. Additional data from a variety of sources, in particular Continental Airlines pilot Tom Bohan, who was flying 4 minutes behind Flight 305, indicated the wind direction factored into drop zone calculations had been wrong, possibly by as much as 80 degrees. This and other supplemental data suggested the actual drop zone was south or southeast of the original estimate, in the drainage area of the Washougal River. In 1986, FBI agent Ralph Himmelschbach wrote, "I have to confess, if I were going to look for Cooper, I would head for the Washougal. The Washougal Valley and its surroundings have been searched repeatedly in subsequent years. To date, no discoveries traceable to the hijacking have been reported. Some investigators have speculated that the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens could have obliterated any remaining physical clues." On February 10, 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbia River at the beachfront known as Tina Bar, about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and 10 miles southwest of Ariel. As he raked the sandy riverbank to build a campfire, he discovered 3 packets of the ransom cash, totaling around $5,800. The bills had disintegrated from lengthy exposure to the elements, but were still bundled in rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed the money was indeed a portion of the ransom. 2 packets of $100 $20 bills each, and a third packet of 90, all arranged in the same order as when given to Cooper. The discovery launched several new rounds of conjecture and ultimately raised more questions than it answered. Initial statements by investigators and scientific consultants were founded on the assumption the bundled bills washed freely into the Columbia River from one of its many connecting tributaries. An Army Corps of Engineers hydrologist noted the bills had disintegrated in a rounded fashion and were matted together, indicating they had been deposited by river action, as opposed to having been deliberately buried. The finding supported the hypothesis that Cooper had landed near the Washougal River, which merges with the Columbia upstream from the discovery site, and not in or near Lake Merwin, the Lewis River, or any of its tributaries feeding the Columbia River downstream from Tina Bar. The free-floating hypothesis neither explained the 10 bills missing from one packet, nor explained how the 3 packets remained together after separating from the rest of the money. Physical evidence was incompatible with geological evidence. Agent Himmelschbach wrote 3 floating bundles would have washed up on the bank within a couple of years of the hijacking. Otherwise, the rubber bands would have long since deteriorated. Geological evidence suggested the bills arrived at Tina Bar after 1974, the year of a Corps of Engineer dredging operation on that stretch of the river. Geologist Leonard Palmer of Portland State University found 2 distinct layers of sand and sediment between the clay deposited on the riverbank by the dredge and the sand layer in which the bills were buried, indicating the bills arrived long after dredging had been completed. In late 2020, analysis of diatoms found on the bills suggests the bundles found at Tina Bar were not submerged in the river or buried dry at the time of the hijacking in November 1971. Only diatoms that bloomed during springtime were found, indicating the money had entered the water at least several months after the hijacking. In 1986, after protracted negotiations, the recovered bills were divided equally between Brian Ingram and Northwest Orient's insurer, Royal Globe Insurance. The FBI retained 14 examples as evidence. Ingram sold 15 of his bills at auction in 2008 for about $37,000. The Columbia River ransom money remains the only confirmed physical evidence from the hijacking found outside the aircraft. During the hijacking, Cooper demanded and received 2 main parachutes and 2 reserve chutes. The 2 reserve chutes were supplied by a local skydiving school, and the 2 main chutes were supplied by a local pilot, Norman Hayden. Earl Cossey, the parachute rigger who packed all 4 parachutes brought to Cooper, described the 2 main chutes as emergency bailout parachutes, as opposed to sporting parachutes that skydivers would use. Cossey further described the main chutes as being like military chutes because they were rigged to open immediately upon the ripcord being pulled and were incapable of being steered. When the plane landed in Reno, FBI agents discovered 2 parachutes that Cooper left behind, 1 reserve chute and 1 main chute. The reserve chute had been opened and 3 shrewd lines had been cut out, but the main chute left behind was still intact. The unused main chute was described by FBI agents as a Model NB6, Navy Backpack 6, and is currently on display at the Washington State Historical Society Museum. One of the 2 reserve chutes Cooper was given was an unusable training chute intended to only be used for classroom demonstrations. According to Cossey, the reserve chute's internal canopy was sewn together so skydiving students could get the feel of pulling a ripcord on a packed parachute without the canopy actually deploying. This non-functional reserve parachute was not found in the aircraft when it landed in Reno, leading FBI agents to speculate that Cooper was not an experienced parachutist because someone with experience would have realised this reserve chute was a dummy chute. However, within days of the hijacking, it was revealed that neither of the parachute harnesses Cooper was given had the necessary D-rings required to attach the reserve chutes. Although Cooper lacked the ability to attach this dummy chute to his main harness as a reserve chute, it was not found in the plane, so what he did with it is unknown. Cozzi speculated that Cooper removed the sewn-together canopy and used the empty reserve container as an extra money bag. Tina Mucklow's testimony was in line with Cozzi's speculation, stating that she recalled Cooper attempting to pack money inside a parachute container. In November 1978, a deer hunter found a 727's instruction placard for lowering the aft air stair. The placard was found near a logging road about 13 miles east of Castle Rock, Washington, north of Lake Merwin, but within Flight 305's basic flight path. By late 2007, the FBI had built a partial DNA profile from samples found on Cooper's tie. However, the FBI also acknowledged that no evidence linked Cooper to the source of the DNA sample. FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt said the tie had 2 small DNA samples and 1 large sample, but that it was difficult to draw firm conclusions from these samples. The FBI also made public a file of previously unreleased evidence, including Cooper's plane ticket, composite sketches, fact sheets, and posted a request for information about Cooper's identification. In March 2009, a group of citizen sleuths, using GPS satellite imagery and other technologies unavailable in 1971, began reinvestigating components of the case. Known as the Cooper Research Team, the group included paleontologist Tom Kay from the Berkeley Museum of Natural History and Culture in Seattle, scientific illustrator Carol Abraginsis, and metallurgist Alan Stone. Although the Cooper Research Team obtained little new information about the buried ransom money or Cooper's landing zone, they found, analysed, and identified hundreds of organic and metal particles on Cooper's tie. Using electron microscopy, the research team identified Lycopodium spores, the source of which was likely pharmaceutical. The team also found minute particles of unalloyed titanium on the tie, along with particles of bismuth, antimony, cerium, strontium, sulfide, aluminium, and titanium antimony alloys. The metal and rare earth particles suggested that Cooper may have worked for Boeing or another aeronautical engineering firm at a chemical manufacturing plant or at a metal fabrication and production facility. The material with the most significance, explained Kay, was the unalloyed titanium. In the 1970s, the use of pure titanium was rare and would only be used in aircraft fabrication facilities or at chemical companies, combining titanium and aluminium to store extremely corrosive substances. The cerium and strontium sulfide were used by Boeing's Supersonic Transport Development Project and by Portland factories in which cathode ray tubes were manufactured, such as Teledyne and Tektronix. Cooper researcher Eric Ulis has speculated that the titanium antimony alloys are linked to Remcrew Titanium Incorporated, a metals manufacturer and Boeing contractor. In 2019, the FBI released a report detailing the burglary of a grocery store about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, near Hessen, Washington. Hessen, an unincorporated community, was within the calculated drop zone Northwest Airlines presented to the FBI. In the report, the FBI noted that the burglar took only survival items, such as beef jerky and gloves. However, it is unknown if the assailant was Cooper. During the first year of the investigation, the FBI used eyewitness testimony from the passengers and flight crew to develop sketches of Cooper. The first sketch, officially titled Composite A, was completed a few days after the hijacking and was released on November 28, 1971. According to witnesses, the Composite A sketch, jokingly known as Bing Crosby, was not an accurate likeness of Cooper. The Composite A sketch said witnesses showed a young man with a narrow face and did not resemble Cooper or capture his disinterested, let's get this over with look. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner repeatedly told the FBI the Composite A sketch was a very poor likeness of Cooper. After multiple eyewitnesses said Composite A was not an accurate rendering, FBI artists developed a second composite sketch. Completed in late 1972, the second Composite B sketch was intended to more accurately depict Cooper's age, skin tone, and face shape. Eyewitnesses to whom Composite B was shown said the sketch was more accurate, but the Composite B Cooper looked too angry or nasty. One flight attendant said the Composite B sketch looked like a hoodlum and remembered Cooper as more refined in appearance. Moreover, said witnesses, the Composite B sketch depicted a man older than Cooper with a lighter complexion. Using the criticisms of Composite B, FBI artists made adjustments and improvements to the sketch. On January 2, 1973, the FBI finalised revised Composite B, their third sketch of Cooper. Of the new sketch, one flight attendant said the revised sketch was a very close resemblance to the hijacker. Another flight attendant said the hijacker could be easily recognised from this sketch. In April 1973, the FBI concluded the revised Composite B sketch was the best likeness of Cooper that they could develop and should be considered the definitive sketch of Cooper. Flight attendants Schaffner and Mucklow, who spent the most time interacting with Cooper, were interviewed on the same night in separate cities and gave nearly identical descriptions. Around 5 feet 10 inches tall, mid-40s, short black hair combed back, 170 to 180 pounds, olive skin tone, and with no discernible accent. The only person to recall his eye colour was Schaffner, who described them as being brown. The FBI relied heavily on the testimony of University of Oregon student Bill Mitchell, who sat across from Cooper during the 3 hours between takeoff in Portland and landing in Seattle. Repeatedly interviewing him for what would become known as Composite Sketch B, his descriptions of Cooper were mostly the same as those of the flight attendants, except that he described Cooper as being somewhat smaller, stating that he thought Cooper was 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, and that at 6 feet 2 inches himself, he was way bigger than Cooper, even referring to him as slight. Robert Gregory, one of the only other passengers besides Mitchell who provided the FBI with a full description of Cooper, also provided a shorter impression of Cooper, describing him as 5 feet 9 inches. Gregory stated that he believed Cooper to be of Mexican-American or American Indian descent. Cooper appeared to be familiar with the Seattle area and may have been an Air Force veteran, based on testimony that he recognized the city of Tacoma from the air as the jet circled Puget Sound, and his accurate comment to Mucklow that McCord Air Force Base was about 20 minutes driving time from Seattle-Tacoma Airport, a detail most civilians would not know or comment upon. His financial situation was very likely desperate. According to the FBI's retired chief investigator, Ralph Himmelschbach, extortionists and other criminals who steal large amounts of money nearly always do so because they need it urgently. Otherwise, the crime is not worth the considerable risk. Alternatively, Cooper may have been a thrill seeker who made the jump just to prove it could be done. In May 1973, the FBI internally released an 8-page suspect profile. The profile speculated that Cooper was a military-trained parachutist and not a sports skydiver, This was because, in addition to his apparent comfort level with the military-style parachutes he was provided, his age would have made him an outlier in the sports skydiving community, thereby increasing the likelihood that he would have been quickly recognised by a member of that community. The profile also speculated that Cooper was someone who exercised regularly due to comments by multiple eyewitnesses regarding Cooper's athletic-looking frame despite his age. They also felt he was not a heavy drinker or an alcoholic because the only drink he was served was quickly spilled and he never requested another. The profile determined that an alcoholic would have likely been incapable of turning down further alcoholic beverages throughout the stressful and lengthy hijacking. By calculating the number of cigarettes he smoked throughout the hijacking, the FBI believed that he smoked around 1 pack of cigarettes a day. Several of Cooper's mannerisms led the FBI to conclude that he was more intelligent than a common criminal, such as his vocabulary level, his proper use of aviation-related terminology, complete lack of profane language, his calm demeanour, his style of dress, and the respect he showed for the female members of the crew. Cooper's ability to quickly and competently adapt to various situations as they arose indicated to profilers that he was likely the type of person who would commit a crime without the need or desire for an accomplice. Agents theorised that Cooper took his alias from a popular French-language Belgian comic series featuring the fictional hero Dan Cooper, a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot who took part in numerous heroic adventures, including parachuting. Because the Dan Cooper comics were never translated into English, nor imported to the US, they speculated that he had encountered them during a tour of duty in Europe. Based on the evidence and Cooper's tactics, the FBI speculated that Cooper carefully planned the hijacking and had detailed, specific knowledge of aviation, the local terrain, and the 727's capabilities. Cooper chose a seat in the last row of the rear cabin for 3 reasons: to observe and respond to any action in front of him, to minimise the possibility of being approached or attacked by someone behind him, and to make himself less conspicuous to the rest of the passengers. To ensure he would not be deliberately supplied with sabotaged equipment, Cooper demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption he might compel 1 or more hostages to jump with him. FBI agent Ralph Himmelschbach noted Cooper's choice of a bomb, instead of other weapons previously used by hijackers, thwarted any multi-directional attempts to rush him. Cooper was also careful to avoid leaving evidence. Before he jumped, he demanded Mucklow return to him all notes either written by him or on his behalf. Mucklow said she used the last match in his paper matchbook to light one of his cigarettes, and when she attempted to dispose of the empty matchbook, he demanded she return it to him. Although he was methodical in his attempts to retrieve evidence, he was unsuccessful as he left his clip-on tie in his seat. Although Cooper was clearly familiar with the 727's capabilities and confidential features, its design was the primary reason Cooper chose the aircraft. With its aft air stair and the placement of its 3 engines, the 727 was one of the only passenger jets from which a parachute jump could be easily made. Cooper also appeared to be familiar with the 727's typical refueling time, with Mucklow telling the FBI that Cooper seemed specifically well informed in refueling procedures. By specifying a 15-degree flap setting, Cooper displayed specific knowledge of aviation tactics and the 727's capabilities. Unlike most commercial jet airliners, the 727 could remain in slow, low-altitude flight without stalling. Cooper's specific flap setting also allowed him to control the 727's airspeed and altitude without entering the cockpit, where Cooper could have been overpowered by the 3 pilots. First Officer Bill Ratazak, who spoke with Cooper on the intercom during the hijacking, told the FBI that Cooper displayed a specific knowledge of flying and aircraft in general. The most significant knowledge Cooper displayed was a feature both secret and unique to the 727. The aft air stair could be operated during flight, and the single activation switch in the rear of the cabin could not be overridden from the cockpit. Cooper knew how to operate the aft staircase and had clearly planned to use it for his escape. The FBI speculated that Cooper knew the Central Intelligence Agency was using 727s to drop agents and supplies into enemy territory during the Vietnam War. Since no situation on a passenger flight would necessitate such an operation, civilian crews were neither informed the aft air stair could be lowered mid-flight, nor were they aware its operations could not be overridden from the cockpit. Cooper appeared to be familiar with parachutes, although his experience level is unknown. Mucklow said Cooper appeared to be completely familiar with the parachute which had been furnished to him, and told a journalist Cooper put on his parachute as though he did so every day. Cooper's familiarity with the military-style parachute he was given has led to speculation that Cooper was a military parachutist and not a civilian skydiver. Larry Carr, who led the investigative team from 2006 to 2009, does not believe Cooper was a paratrooper. Instead, Carr speculates that Cooper had been an Air Force aircraft cargo loader. An aircraft cargo loading assignment would provide him with aviation knowledge and experience. Cargo loaders have basic jump training, wear emergency parachutes, and know how to dispatch items from planes in flight. As a cargo loader, Cooper would be familiar with parachutes, but not necessarily sufficient knowledge to survive the jump he made. From the beginning of their investigation, FBI agents did not believe Cooper survived his jump. The FBI provided several reasons and facts to support their conclusion. Cooper's apparent lack of skydiving experience, his apparent unfamiliarity with parachutes cited by some experts, his lack of proper equipment for his jump and survival, the temperature and inclement weather on the night of the hijacking, the wooded terrain into which Cooper jumped, his lack of knowledge of his landing area, and the unused ransom money. First, Cooper appeared to lack the necessary skydiving knowledge, skills, and experience for the type of jump he attempted. Carr originally thought that Cooper was an experienced jumper, perhaps even a paratrooper. They concluded after a few years this simply was not true. No experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch black night, in the rain, with a 172-mile wind in his face, wearing loafers and a trench coat. It was simply considered too risky. Skydiving instructor Earl Cossey, who supplied the parachutes, testified that Cooper did not need extensive experience to survive the jump, and anyone who had 6 or 7 practice jumps could accomplish this. However, Cossey also noted jumping at night drastically increased the risk of injury, and without jump boots, Cooper probably would have suffered severe ankle or leg injuries upon landing. Second, Cooper did not appear to have the equipment necessary for either his jump or his survival in the wilderness. Cooper failed to bring or request a helmet and jumped into a 15 Fahrenheit or -9°C wind at 10,000 feet in November over Washington State without proper protection against the extreme wind chill. Although the contents of Cooper's paper bag are unknown, Cooper did not use any of the bag's contents to assist him during any part of the hijacking, so the FBI speculated that the bag contained items Cooper needed for his jump, such as boots, gloves, and goggles. Third, Cooper did not appear to have an accomplice waiting on the ground to help him escape. Such an arrangement would have required both a precisely timed jump and the flight crew's cooperation to follow a predetermined flight path. Cooper did not give the flight crew a specific path. Moreover, the flight crew proposed, and Cooper agreed, to alter the flight path and fly from Seattle to Reno for refueling, and Cooper had no way of keeping an accomplice apprised of his changed plans. The low cloud cover and lack of visibility to the ground further complicated Cooper's ability to determine his location, establish a bearing, or see his landing zone. Finally, the ransom money was never spent, and the recovered portion was found unused. Diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment, in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got his chute open, said Carr. FBI agent Richard Tosaw theorized that Cooper became incapacitated from hypothermia during his jump, landed in the Columbia River, and drowned. However, FBI agents were not unanimous in their assessments of Cooper's ultimate fate. A senior FBI agent anonymously opined in a 1976 article in the Seattle Times, "I think Cooper made it. I think he slept in his own bed that night. It was a clear night. A lot of the country is pretty flat. He could have just walked out, right down the road. Hell, they weren't even looking for him there at that time. They thought he was somewhere else. He could just walk down the road." Conclusive evidence of Cooper's death has not been found. In the months following the Cooper hijacking, 5 men attempted copycat hijackings, and all 5 survived their parachute escapes. The survival of the copycats, several of whom faced circumstances and conditions similar to Cooper's jump, forced FBI lead case agent Ralph Himmelschbach to re-evaluate his opinions and theories regarding Cooper's chances for survival. Himmelschbach cited 3 examples of hijackers who survived jumps in conditions similar to Cooper's escape: Martin McNally, Frederick Hanneman, and Richard LaPointe. Hijacker Martin McNally jumped using only a reserve chute, without protective gear at night, over Indiana. Unlike Cooper, who appeared to be familiar with parachutes, McNally had to be shown how to put on his parachute. Additionally, McNally's pilot increased the airspeed to 320 knots, nearly twice the airspeed of Flight 305 at the time of Cooper's jump. The increased wind speed caused a violent jump for McNally. The money bag was immediately tore from him, yet he had landed unharmed except for some superficial scratches and bruises. 49-year-old Frederick Hanneman hijacked a 727 in Pennsylvania and survived after jumping at night into a Honduran jungle. A third copycat, Richard LaPointe, hijacked a 727 in Nevada, wearing only trousers, a shirt, and cowboy boots. LaPointe jumped into the freezing January wind over northern Colorado and landed in the snow. In 2008, Himmelschbach admitted he originally thought Cooper had only a 50% chance of survival, but subsequently revised his assessment. By 1976, most published legal analysis concurred the impending expiration of the statute of limitations for prosecution of the hijacker would make little difference. Since the statute's interpretation varies from case to case and from court to court, a prosecutor could argue that Cooper had forfeited legal immunity on any of several valid technical grounds. In November 1976, a Portland grand jury returned an indictment in absentia against John Doe, aka Dan Cooper, for air piracy and violation of the Hobbs Act. The indictment formally enabled prosecution to be continued should the hijacker be apprehended at any time in the future. Between 1971 and 2016, the FBI processed more than 1,000 serious suspects, including assorted publicity seekers and deathbed confessors. Richard McCoy. McCoy was a former Green Beret and experienced skydiver. He committed a similar hijacking less than 5 months after the D.B. Cooper incident. He was later killed in a shootout with the FBI. Kenneth Christensen, a former military paratrooper and Northwest Orient Airlines employee. Some circumstantial evidence pointed towards him, but nothing conclusive was found. He denied involvement and passed away in 1994. Dwayne Webber. Webber confessed to his wife on his deathbed in 1995 that he was D.B. Cooper. His wife later found a key to a locker containing a decaying wad of cash, which added to the mystery. Despite the confession, the evidence remains inconclusive. Robert Rackstraw. A former Army paratrooper and pilot. Rackstraw became a suspect due to his military background and alleged connections to the case. However, no conclusive evidence tied him to the crime, and he denied involvement until his death in 2019. Lynn Doyle Cooper, a distant relative of the initial suspect, D.B. Cooper. Some believed he resembled composite sketches of the hijacker. The evidence connecting him to the crime was weak, and he was never officially considered a suspect. William J. Smith, a former Special Forces paratrooper. He was investigated due to his skydiving skills and criminal record. No conclusive evidence linked him to the crime. John List. List was a fugitive who murdered his family in 1971 and disappeared. Some speculated that he could be D.B. Cooper, but there is no substantial evidence supporting this theory. Walter R. Reeker. In 2018, an individual named Walter R. Reeker was suggested as a possible suspect. This claim was based on a confession letter purportedly written by Reeker, but the authenticity of the letter and its connection to the case are disputed. And finally, Robert Wesley Rackstraw, a different one from the previous Rackstraw. Rackstraw, a former Army helicopter pilot, was investigated as a possible suspect. Some believed that he matched the physical description of D.B. Cooper, but no conclusive evidence tied him to the crime. Cooper was among the first to attempt air piracy for personal gain, but merely 11 days prior to Cooper's hijack, Canadian Paul Joseph Sinney hijacked an Air Canada DC-8 over Montana, but was overpowered by the crew when he put down his shotgun to strap on his parachute. Encouraged by Cooper's apparent success, 15 similar hijackings, all unsuccessful, were attempted in 1972. Despite the initiation of the Federal Sky Marshal program the previous year, 31 hijackings were committed in US airspace in 1972. 19 of them were for the specific purpose of extorting money. In 15 of the extortion cases, the hijackers also demanded parachutes. In early 1973, the FAA began requiring airlines to search all passengers and their bags. Amid multiple lawsuits charging that such searches violated Fourth Amendment protections against search and seizure, federal courts ruled that they were acceptable when applied universally and when limited to searches for weapons and explosives. Only 2 hijackings were attempted in 1973, both by psychiatric patients. One hijacker, Samuel Bike, intended to crash the airliner into the White House to kill President Nixon. With the advent of universal luggage searches in 1973, the general incidence of hijackings dropped dramatically. There were no further notable Cooper imitators until July 11, 1980, when Glenn K. Tripp seized Northwest Orient Flight 608 at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, demanding $600,000, 2 parachutes, and the assassination of his boss. A quick-thinking flight attendant drugged Tripp's alcoholic drink with Valium. After a 10-hour standoff, during which Tripp reduced his demands to 3 cheeseburgers and a ground vehicle in which to escape, he was apprehended. Tripp attempted to hijack the same Northwest flight on January 21, 1983, and this time demanded to be flown to Afghanistan. When the plane landed in Portland, he was shot and killed by FBI agents. Due to multiple copycat hijackings in 1972, the FAA required that the exterior of all Boeing 727 aircraft be fitted with a spring-loaded device, later dubbed the Cooper vane, that prevents lowering of the aft air stair during flight. The device consists of a flat blade of aluminium mounted on a pivot, which is spring-loaded to stay out of the way of the door when the craft is at rest, but aerodynamically rotates into position to prevent the door from being opened when the plane is travelling at flight speeds. Operation of the vane is automatic and cannot be overridden from within the aircraft. As a direct result of the hijacking, the installation of peepholes was also mandated in all cockpit doors, enabling the cockpit crew to observe passengers without opening the door. On July 8, 2016, The FBI announced active investigation of the Cooper case was suspended, citing the need to focus investigative resources and manpower on issues of higher and more urgent priority. Local field offices would continue to accept any legitimate physical evidence related specifically to the parachutes or to the ransom money that may emerge in the future. The 66-volume case file, compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation, would be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on the FBI website. All of the evidence is open to the public. The crime remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shadow Crimes. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media and check out our website at shadowcrimes.com, where mysteries thrive and shadows speak.